Welcome to Give Me a Hint, a program about remembering Scripture. I'm Alan Matthew. In the previous program, I presented a way to memorize Scripture by using creativity and imagination rather than just repetition. I should add that some repetition is required for unfamiliar verses, right? Because you can't create a visual image for every single word. It would just be too long. If you're using a King James Version of the Bible, you might try a New King James Version or American Standard Version to get more modern wording. Makes it a little easier. Some Bible chapters are fairly easy to memorize, like the 23rd Psalm, because they contain lots of word pictures. But some chapters have lots of abstract words. I wanted to memorize 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. It has some word pictures, but also a lot of abstract words too, like envy, long-suffering, kind, beareth, believeth, etc. I found that it was easier if I, at least for this chapter, to associate those words with Bible characters that embodied those traits, especially if the characters show up in the same story. I'll show you what I mean by working through part of the love chapter. So for verse 1, it says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. So for this verse, I first see myself with my arm around the shoulder of my guardian angel, and I have a trumpet in one hand and some finger cymbals in the other. You get the picture? The second verse says, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge. Well, here I have my arm around the shoulder of my buddy Daniel, who definitely had the gift of prophecy. Verse 2, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not charity, I am nothing. So now I see myself with Jesus, who had the faith to move mountains and the charity to go with it. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor. Now I'm remembering the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and was told to sell all that he had and give to the poor. So I'm seeing his disappointed face for this part of the verse. The next part, and though I give my body to be burned. Well, here I've moved on and I'm with my 3 Hebrew friends in the fiery furnace in Babylon. The last part of verse 3 says, and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Well, the word profiteth, I relate back to that rich young ruler, right? So it's memorable. So these 3 verses all follow a clear pattern that helps me remember them. Though I something and have not charity, I am nothing or whatever. So now comes some verses, 4 verses with some abstract words. Verse 4 says, charity suffereth long and is kind. So here I think of Abraham and his dealings with Lot and the conflict over the grazing. They were running out of pasture land, right, remember? So Abraham didn't get upset. He was kind to Lot and let him choose first the land that he wanted. The next part says, charity envieth not. Well, Abraham didn't envy Lot when he chose all the green valleys for his flocks. Next part says, charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. Remember, Abraham actually had to go rescue Lot and the people of Sodom from another king, but he did not brag about it or take any of the spoils, and he credited God by giving and paying his tithe. Notice that these images all happening in order of the story. So verse 5, doth not behave itself unseemly. Well, here I see the men of Sodom gathering in the evening near the gate of the city to behave unseemly. Seeketh not her own. Well, the men of Sodom were certainly seeking their own in more ways than one. Verse 5, is not easily provoked. Well, they were ready to break down Lot's door, right, to his house. Thinketh no evil. Well, thinking evil is exactly what the men of Sodom were doing. In verse 5, you can see that I'm visualizing characters that are doing what charity does not do. So, for verse 6, rejoice not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in truth. Well, you could stay with the men of Sodom for this verse, but we already covered that part of the story pretty well, so I moved on to the cave where Lot and his 2 remaining daughters ended up staying. You probably know that story of how they became pregnant by getting their father drunk. Verse 7, beareth all things. Well, here I move on to Sarah. She was barren and had to live with that disappointment and shame for a very long time. Believeth all things. But the Lord visited Sarah and Abraham and told them they would have a child in a year. Sarah laughed, but she also believed. Verse 7, hopeth all things. Well, Sarah spent the next year hoping for that promised child, and probably many years before that as well. Endureth all things. Well, Sarah endured birthing a baby in her old age. And then verse 8, charity never faileth. The promise from the Lord did not fail. Sarah and Abraham had their promised child. So you can see how sometimes you can find characters in a story that just fit the verses very well and spark your memory as you mentally walk through it. I hope this helps you with another way to memorize Scripture.